What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some news primarily about Fable, specifically the Fable reboot that was announced quite some time ago, but thanks to the recent Xbox Developer Direct, we finally got a large amount of information for. Though, funnily enough, I did a video yesterday talking about some of the things I was hoping it would do, and I was happy to see that I got the vast majority of that in there. Now, the Xbox Developer Direct show is, I would say, relatively recent show that Xbox has been doing every year in January to highlight some of the titles that they have been working on. This year's lineup included things like Forza Horizon 6, Beast of Reincarnation from Game Freak, and Kiln, a sort of weird party brawler. And while those are all interesting in their own ways, for the sake of this channel, Fable is really the only thing that was deeply interesting to me personally. As, like a great many people, I really enjoyed the ideas behind the original series, even if they never quite landed in a way that felt super satisfying. And so this reboot is a really interesting thing in the sense that I hope it manages to deliver on some of those promises of the original games. With that out of the way, let's dive into some of these details here. So for starters, this is a full-blown reboot. The title is just Fable. It is not Fable 4. It is just Fable. To that end, it is also going to be an open-world action RPG, and they do in fact mean a big open world. Pretty much as soon as you leave the initial area, you'll be able to go pretty much anywhere you want almost immediately and interact with the game's systems in a way that might see you ignoring the main story altogether. And we'll talk a little bit about those systems in a moment, but the core premise of Fable is that our character grows up in a small village, seemingly with their grandmother, and eventually discovers that they are in fact a hero. In the world of Albion, in which the Fable games take place, heroes are a little bit different. It seems to be related to their bloodlines, as an example, but some people are heroes, and they're more than the ordinary person generally. And one thing that really sets them apart is their ability to do things like wield magic, as an example. Either way, as you come of age, it seems that your small village gets turned entirely to stone by some mysterious stranger, and the crux of the main plot is that you track down this person and see what happened, why this happened, and all that. If, provided of course, that you want to. They have made it clear that the main story can wait, and if you want to leave that village, go up to a different village or settlement and settle down there and make a whole life for yourself, you are certainly welcome to do so in places that we'll be returning to, such as Bowerstone, like the main city from the original series. And so let's talk about some of those systems then, as that is very interesting to me personally. The Fable series was definitely known for your ability to buy up all the property and interact with the denizens of an individual place pretty extensively with all sorts of emotes, and while a lot of it was very silly, there was a compelling experience there. And that is an experience that the Fable reboot is also going to be trying to deliver on. And so you'll be able to do things like buy houses and property and, rent them out to people. And what was especially interesting here is on top of that, all of the NPCs you meet in the game are named individuals with full routines. They call this their living population. And I think more than likely, if you're watching this channel, you've likely played games like that with NPCs in that way. What makes it different though is just how much you can interact with them. So for instance, your character can potentially get a job, romance individual characters, settle down, have kids, but because of the way this system works, it's very possible that these named NPCs and things will potentially be living in houses and properties that you buy up. It's possible for you to evict them, and they're going to adjust their reactions to your character based on individual things like that. Another thing they pointed out was that you'll apparently be able to hire NPCs to work for you in jobs, and the crazy part is apparently all of that is going to be fully voiced as well, so that'll be interesting to see. Now on its own, that's pretty cool. Happy to see a game tackle that, but I think what's really going to drive it home is what they've done with the morality system. The original Fable games were known for a pretty binary morality system where you were basically good or you were evil, and while you could theoretically be something in between, it never really happened that much because of the way the game's reward systems ultimately work. In this game, they're going for a bit of a, I would say, morally gray approach to morality systems, in the sense that everything you do basically applies a reputation to your character for that thing. Whether, you're rich, for example, or you like to run around kicking chickens. More or less, the things you do apply a reputation for that thing to your character in a given settlement. It did seem like, from what they implied here, that the reputations were specific to the settlements that you were in for the most part, though details were a little bit vague on that front, so who knows. Basically though, your combination of how you treat characters giving you these tags then determines how they react to you, meaning that a character you evicted from a house you own's probably not gonna like you very much. Some people won't like you just because your character has a lot of money, or perhaps the way you dress, things like that. What's cool though is this is not a universal system, and they wanted to make that clear in the sense that not every NPC will react to these things the same way. And that's the sort of morally gray thing. Some characters will absolutely love that you go around kicking chickens seemingly at random. Other characters actually don't think that's such a good thing to do, and the same goes for basically everything else. And all told, I think if they can actually pull the entirety of that system off, that will be something particularly interesting. And if I'm being honest, it's one of the biggest things I am excited to actually see in this upcoming title. Now, another thing that's definitely worth mentioning is that they have in fact confirmed character creation. Now, this is interesting because while there was a lot of customization in the original Fable games, you didn't really create your character. You could at most choose between a boy or girl, and then the choices you would make during gameplay could potentially decide some things like how your character looked, but the base template was always the same, and here we are getting the ability to change that. However, this does lead to one thing from the showcase that I was not a big fan of, which is actually that they are apparently dropping the body morphing. Body morphing was the effects of things like morality or your choices on your character's appearance. So for instance, based on how you built your character in Fable 1, like the skill experience you gained and spent could make your character taller, buffing up strength would make you physically bigger, being evil would cause you to grow horns, things like that. And I'm sad to say that that is not being carried forth, so while I'm happy to see that we're getting a proper character creation, it's unfortunate that they're dropping the body morphing alongside of it. Now, I will say, as the character creation goes, we did not see anything akin to like menus or stuff, and presumably that stuff just isn't finalized in the UI, which is very normal even at this point in the process, but it does leave us with questions about the scope of that character creation that I simply just don't have the answer for right now, and how in-depth it will actually be, because if we're dropping the body morphing, I really hope that the actual character creation is at least good. Now, much of everything else they talked about was down to like biomes and places you'll visit, and of course combat. Now, on the biome side of things, they basically confirmed that the open world will have different biomes, different settlements. They talked a little bit about a cult of shadows alongside some different gangs that were ruling a place called Bluntstone that you could get involved with, things like that. Probably more or less expected given the scope of the game as an open world action RPG. Those things were just kind of a given, I would say, if anything, but I am curious to see how this reputation and morality system interacts with the game's factions and if that comes into play at all, though that's just musings on my own part. Now, before we talk about combat on the character side of things, I actually wanted to mention a little bit about what they talked about in terms of the enemies you'll be facing. So we're going to see the return of, I would say, classic enemies that are part of the universe of Albion, like Hobbs, Balverines, and the Undead, and that was pretty much always a given. However, one thing that the original games, especially outside of the first one, kind of struggled with was actually enemy variety, and so I was happy to see that they confirmed here that they are introducing new enemy types. They gave an example of a cockatrice, and they also confirmed that all of these enemies will have different strengths and weaknesses, things like weak spots, and they will interact with the different styles of combat you have accordingly, and that's probably something most people would expect. I just wanted to point out that as we talk about this new combat system they are going with, that's something to know. Now, not so much in the showcase itself, but in an interview after the showcase went live, we got some answers about the, I would say, overall concept of combat, and that being that they wanted you to be able to seamlessly transition and mix up both strength, skill, and magic or will. Those three core pillars of the original series are going to influence the combat here, but what they're going for here is for you to be able to sort of frictionlessly switch between them to come up with combinations and ways to approach different enemies. This means you can be hammering away on an enemy with a melee weapon only to then switch to spells of some sort, be they tactical controls or just outright damage, that kind of thing, and be able to weave those things together relatively seamlessly. But, as was, I would say, the case with most of the other games as well, it does seem important to actually utilize all three of these different things. Now, melee or strength is more or less what you'd expect. You'd pick up different types of melee weapons and go all in on enemies. There are going to be things like combos and finishers. They were called flourishes in the original games, and it looks like the core idea of that is still the same. These finishers are basically a big flourish that does a bunch of damage, that kind of thing, as you would probably expect. Ranged does look to be in the realm of like bows and arrows, which is interesting. I know, for instance, there were guns in Fable at one point, but here we primarily saw things like an actual bow. They also confirmed that some enemies will be flying, and that's where that is obviously going to come in the most handy for. Though I will be curious to see if they do anything especially meaningful with those types of enemies and the compositions they throw at you and try to actually make you weave in between all of those different styles of combat or what happens. Now, in terms of magic, they described this as switching between things like tactical control type of spells and then more damage-oriented stuff. What they actually showed off, at least in terms of spells that you could cast, were more, I would say, basics in terms of a magic system, you know, throwing fireballs, throwing lightning. Some stuff was slightly more out there, like summoning up these different sort of dagger things that then shot at an enemy. So it looks like there's going to be some variety there, but we don't really understand the full scope of the magic system just yet. But all told, I do think it must really be said here that a lot of this just kind of reminds me of The Witcher's combat. The Witcher 3, to be specific, and while it's not one for one, there are some things that are different, especially the tone, obviously, but just looking at the combat they showed off, the actual like vibes it gives me is something like The Witcher in terms of how it actually plays. And I'm sure people's reactions to it will likely be as mixed as they are with The Witcher 3's, if that is actually the case, mind you. But again, this is the kind of thing that until it's actually in my hands and I'm playing through it myself, it's hard to get much of an actual read on. But I will say it looks fairly promising, and I am actually happy for that, because as a total experience for this showcase and everything they showed off, I would say that it primarily answered a great many things that I specifically was wondering. It definitely looks like they get the things that made the original Fable series the original Fable, and at least as far as this showcase goes, this is looking especially promising. And the really nice thing is, while we did not get an official release date, we did get a release window of fall 2026. That said, I believe this game was also supposed to be out in 2025 at one point, so we'll see if it actually makes that, but with any luck, we'll be playing this game a little later this year and hopefully talking about it then. But as for today, that is pretty much going to do it. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to know what you thought about all of this down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.